Hello, my name is Arnošt Novák. I'm from Charles University, and I'm a sociologist and one of the authors of this presentation. My co-author is Ondřej Slačálek. He is a political scientist, but unfortunately he couldn't be here. In our presentation, we explore relationship between civil disobedience and direct action. Our presentation has two parts. In the first one, we will return historically to the different genealogies of civil disobedience and direct action. And in the second part of the presentation, we will look how the both concept, civil disobedience and direct action, overlap and hybridize in practice. I'm using specific empirical examples from Czech Republic, one from environmental movement, one from climate movement, and one from squatting. And we will show the difference between liberal and anarchist conceptions of direct action. Our main argument of the presentation is that also there is a blending of the both concepts, civil disobedience and direct action, in practice. Analytically, it's important to distinguish between them. Before more detailed description of civil disobedience based on analysis of their historical roots and rethinking their implication, I will show main conceptual differences. Both civil disobedience and direct actions mean political action aiming to social change. They both often mean conflict with the law. As we will show later on, they also overlap in practice. Nevertheless, reconstruction of their foundations, especially Henry David Thoreau's essay on civil disobedience and anarchist and anarcho-syndicalist theories of direct action, shows also very important differences. Civil disobedience we understood as a radical form of dialogue with state power. Refusal to obey the law and acceptance of punishment has its strategical goal to initiate public debate about legitimacy of the law, the institution or policy, and its changes. Civil disobedience comes as the last instance, similarly as the war in theory of just war, after failing of more moderate tools. Civil disobedience is based in citizenship. By disobeying the law and acceptance the punishment, citizens manifest his or her civic virtues. In opposite, direct action doesn't focus on gaining legitimacy, but on practical results. It refuses dialogue with state power. Direct action wants to produce power for disadvantaged classes or social movements. It's based on strong idea on general illegitimacy of existing power structures, though it also does not accept punishment for them. To dig more deeply into roots of civil disobedience, we see that its basis in a relationship between citizens and state makes this approach fundamentally individualistic. Even in case of collective and coordinated civil disobedience, the basis for this approach is individual citizenship. This approach makes probably sense only in liberal democratic states, which legitimizes its action by public support and debate. We also can see that in spite of the fact that civil disobedience can be immediate act of breaking the law, its temporality is long. The disobedience and acceptance of punishments is only the first step, which has to start dialogue in society, to inspire others to follow the inspiration and to start public debate about legitimacy of given policy. The results of civil disobedience are those distant in time and do not depend on will of its actor. Genealogically spoken, anarchist direct action we can understand as miniaturized version of the revolution. Inspired by Paris Commune, anarchists organized small uprising in countryside, often connected with burning of official records, or committed assassination of important politicians, policemen, or accidental members of bourgeoisie. In this case, the actor is a group of committed revolutionaries or committed individuals. In both cases, they broke their ties to their citizenship. The direct action has a very short temporality of one decisive moment of uprising or assassination. By its form, it makes impossible any negotiation or compromise. It was focused on manifest powerlessness of state, its elite and repressive apparatus to inspire other similar deeds and the revolution. While the most important formulators of anarcho-syndicalist ideology came from anarchist movement, anarcho-syndicalist concept of direct action reflected completely different of collective experience, namely labor conflicts. While anarcho-syndicalists used a wide repertoire of practice, including sabotage, boycott, and others, the most important of them were strikes. They had their clear mass dimension, meet radical conflict, not only passive stop working, but also organized solidarity to raise funds for families of strikers and childcare, as well as often violent attempt to block workplace and to make impossible for employers to use strike breakers. While previous anarchist direct action were focused on weakness of oppressors, anarcho-syndicalist direct action were focused on collective power of oppressed. They also differed by long temporality and some openness to negotiate and compromise, which was mostly necessary result of successful strikes, with exception of anticipated and partially mythical great general strikes, which had to be first step in revolution. Now we moved in history to the 70s years, and from 70s we can see new wave of direct action and civil disobedience, which are often overlapping. Since 70s, a lot of new social movements such as environmental, gay and lesbian, peace movement, and so on, have used repertoire of action such as demonstration, occupation, happenings, sabotage, and so on, which has been labeled as direct action, and even activists themselves frame this action as direct action. I think that good examples are environmental movement and organization Greenpeace. Activists from Greenpeace took direct action to draw attention to the issue. Their determination to face risk and arrest and accept its punishment, it gave them moral weight to their action. They put emphasis on legitimacy of their action. Their action were labeled as direct action, and they themselves called them as direct action, even this action were often symbolic. We can distinguish two kinds of direct action in new social movements. These two kinds of direct action, of the concept direct action, could be understood as some ideal sociological ideal tips. On the one side, there is liberal direct action. For example, good example is Greenpeace. It means that this direct action are used as last resort when all available means fail. The aim of this action is to draw attention, be witness, to accept punishment, to make pressure through media, and to change public opinion. And these actions demand some democratic legitimation. And these actions of Greenpeace, for example, are some instrumental way to push some demands. On other side, there are anarchist conception of direct action, and this is difference. It's not instrumental, but it's not instrumental. It's some preferred way of doing politics, with everyday politics. It's some kind of prefigurative politics. It means consistency of means and ends, and the aim of this anarchist concept direct action is some empowerment people to practice power too. And also this anarchist conception of direct action has two roles, educational and exemplary role. Educational role means that when people want to be free, they have to learn to be free and to act free person just now. And exemplary role means to inspire others to act as free person just now. Now, in the second part of our presentation, I would like to use three examples from Czech Republic to show possible form of hybridization of civil disobedience and direct action. The first case will be from blockade of construction of nuclear power plant in 1997. The second case will be climate direct action in 2017 and later. And third one is example from squatting in Prague. The first case is blockade of construction nuclear power plant from 1997. It was blockade of construction. It was part of long-time campaign of ecological organization, and this organization, ecological organization, uses direct action as some instrumental way to make pressure on the politician to communicate through media. It was symbolic way to draw attention and create moral pressure to government decision. The blockade was instrumental in this campaign, and it was hierarchically organized, and leadership, the blockade, decided about rules. It was strictly non-violence, and non-violence was understood as basic value. They decided about forms of blockade and about the end of blockades without possibility other activists and participants to participate on the decision during the blockade. This creates tensions inside the movement, inside the blockade, and clash between the leadership of the blockade and anarchists who made up the majority on activists. And I think that it's good example, different understanding what direct action means. On one side, there was liberal understanding of direct action at the leadership of the ecological organization, and against it was anarchist understanding direct action among anarchist participants in the blockade. So I think that this is the first example, is good example when these two kinds of understanding, conception, direct action are went against themselves. The second example is direct action from climate justice movement. It was direct action organized by the climate justice movement in Czech Republic since 2011, and it was very similar as Ende Gelände in Germany. Activists organized climate camps. In during the climate camps, they did some mass direct action. They occupied mining site. This direct action was inspired more anarchist concept direct action because activists put emphasis on self-organization, horizontality. They labeled the whole climate camp, also the action as direct action. They using affinity groups during the blockade to be as horizontal and participant as possible. And so this is a good example, some direct action inspired by anarchist concept of direct action, but also we can see some hybridization with civil disobedience, because they use non-violence not as value but as a strategy. They try to direct action legitimize through some democratic legitimization, and it was also symbolic blockade of the mine to attract media attention and to bear witness. So this second case is a good example, some hybridization when the both concept liberal concept direct action, which is very similar to civil disobedience, and anarchist concept direct action are hybridized and overlapping. And the third example is example of squatting in Prague. The squatting in the first view is good example direct action, because people have some needs, housing, culture needs, social needs, so they go and squat empty houses. Also, popular slogan "squat and life" is good expression the direct action. And also, squatting is good example direct actions as preferred rate of actions. Plus, two other aspects of anarchist direct action are congruence of means and ends and educational and exemplary role. But for the Czech or Prague example is quite interesting, that in contrast, for example, from Spain or Germany, where in squatting movement was debate about legalization or non-legalization of squats, because squatters movement was very weak in Prague. Since 90s, all squats seek to negotiate and to legalize the squat. So squatters use non-violence as tactic and try to gain some legitimacy. They say squatting is not legal, okay, but what they do is legitimate. So they use argumentation of civil disobedience and try to negotiate, try to initiate some public debate. So even squatting is a good example when the both concept of direct action, liberal and anarchist hybridize. Even in the squatting, the anarchist concept maybe is much more stronger. So I'm going to conclusions. So we have some main argument that while civil disobedience and direct action in their pure forms can be good for classification and debates and some ideal types of in sociology or in political theory, real social movement produce hybrids, but we still think that it's important to distinguish between civil disobedience and direct action because of some analytical way could be useful. And then we have some two conclusions, some preliminary conclusions for debates. And the first one is that for direct action in liberal democracies or in working liberal democracies is characteristical adoption of some elements of civil disobedience. It's examples of the hybridization. It means struggle for public legitimacy, long-term temporality. At the same time, tactical repertoires implied by civil disobedience are not enough for their relative passivity and individualism. Her ethos of direct action inspire more, for example, Greenpeace and some environmental activists. And other preliminary conclusions, we can hypothesize that in more repressive regimes or more authoritative regimes, not only Russia, Turkey, Belarus, but to some extent also United States, Poland, Czech Republic, and maybe more others, direct action lose their characteristic and struggle for public legitimacy because Trump, Orban, Kaczynski don't care about public opinion or legitimacy, and have tendency to be focused more on direct practical results. We can see how some direct action networks based on mutual aid and this stuff are growing in the United States or in Poland in case of rights of refugees or of rights of women. So this is the end, and thank you for listening.
Perfect timing. Excellent. Thank you very much. I think it was rather well. Questions? Please.
Hi, I'm thinking about, and I was just studying like transmitters.
So I see that.
While I was listening to your presentation, you started making me think of the case of Senegal, these type of hybrids.
Hybridization.
So I'm thinking about non-violent direct action. While the activists, it happens a lot where they are prepared to actual confrontation. So they come out as non-violent, they march, and then there's a state response in the form of repression or whatever, and then there's confrontation. So there's this fit in this narrative of going from civil disobedience, from direct action to transitioning to civil disobedience in certain way.
Yes, and it's a good question or comment because it's a big question. What does it mean non-violence? What does it mean violence? I think there are some struggle not only in public or media or inside the movement. What does it mean violence? And there is just some about this early myths and well, because some people say that even squatting is violent because if you go and occupy empty houses, it's violent act because you can have to break into the house and up and down. So it depends on the debate, and I think that the definition is still moving and struggle for definitions. And I think that the big difference is in my presentation between non-violence as a basic value. It was the first case of the communal ecological activist uses basic values. We have to be strictly non-violent, and you have to sign the paper with non-violence. And when he didn't sign this paper, we announced him to the police. And with the starting of the clash between ecological activists and anarchists. Because who will not sign a non-violence paper, he will be his name be given to the police. So the strictly definition of non-violence, but in the other cases, direct action of climate justice movement, the debate wasn't about if you are non-violence, but we use non-violence as tactics because it's senseless to be violence in the mining against police and stuff. So it was some consensus for this action and consensus between radical anti-fascists and pacifists that for this action will be non-violence as tactics. And this non-violence as tactics, it's much more functioning inside the movement, I think, than to debate about basic values.
Yeah, so I want to, you're talking about hybridity, and it strikes me that concept of hybridity has within it a kind of positioning of spaces. So when I think about legalizing squatters, I think about the manifest action of subversion. If the state says, okay, squatting is okay, they got it. Something, right? I mean, in terms of as a tactic of subverting the state, I think this hybridity like a strategy, not as a tactic. I believe.
It's a good question. I have to think about it.
That's a good answer. Hi, I'm Rick Curtis from the University of the US. I also really enjoyed the presentation, and maybe this is more of kind of an observation. I'll try to turn it into a question. But one of the things that I noticed, or your presentation kind of caused me to reflect on, is this idea that historically, at least as concepts, it appears, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong here, if I understand correctly, civil disobedience as a concept effectively emerges prior to direct action as the concept historically, which I find interesting insofar as, I mean, if we think about direct action in contrast to, the indirect actions that, syndicalists and anarchists develop the concept, direct action basically contrasts itself by the refusal, or I should say, indirect actions are those which are mediated by social, cultural, institutional, and political forms, right? And so if we think about, again, the kind of early origins of direct action, especially in the labor movement, right? It's about maybe more, in a way, it strikes me as being more primordial. Like it's a way of kind of refusing all of these kinds of institutional mediations, which themselves require kind of a historical process of development, right? So there's kind of like this, again, I'm sorry, I'm kind of trying to make sense of this in terms of kind of the historical emergence of these movements. So I'm wondering if you can kind of speak to the extent to which, again, civil disobedience presupposes all of these historical developments, yet at the same time, if we think about, we can look at the historical record and we can identify these kind of pre-modern or even, proto labor actions that we can identify as direct actions that are not necessarily being recognized as such. We have historically, the conceptualization is that civil disobedience emerges, and then there's this kind of affirmation or reclamation of direct action after that. So I wondered if maybe to kind of speak to these kind of like historical developments involved in themselves.
I mean, historical development of direct action on civil disobedience.
Yeah, well, you can just have the relationship and tension between them.
Yeah, I think that we try to show in the presentation there are the two roots of that the civil disobedience have a different root than anarchist direct action. And also I think that your comment is good that you mentioned indirect action, and I think that I understood civil disobedience suppose some indirect action, that I will be disobedient by I ask the government to act differently, but the difference direct action is that it's direct. But, especially when we show anarcho-syndicalist direct action, that it's concept self-organization or self-emancipation, and I think that it's the difference from the civil disobedience. We didn't mention it exactly. I agree with you that it's also important to different direct from indirect civil disobedience. I don't know if I'm sorry.
Maybe it's sort of partly questions and partly in response to read. I think one of the interesting things you read with manuals and handbooks, because certain movements that identify themselves with manuals of direct action, and that the early French ones don't talk about civil disobedience at all. Certainly through the years, I think some of the later ones that were produced in the United States around civil rights and post-Tagung manuals start to then list civil disobedience as a form of direct action. So they will start to encompass direct action as civil disobedience as an element or a form or version of direct action, but one among others. I guess your point, as we understand it, is that actually there's a tension between the traditions that the attempts to incorporate covers over. And then, if I understand what you're trying to say, that we should maintain our sensitivity to that possible tension rather than just accepting the kind of incorporation logic. It's also interesting that some later manuals actually reverse it. I was looking at an early manual of ecological action produced in France in the middle of 1937, which actually listed civil disobedience as the master category, and then things that we would consider direct action underneath it. So I had sabotage, eco-sabotage, version of civil disobedience. So there's, I guess in some ways it's reflecting your notion of hybridization, because the sexual contest is sometimes specific fusion, which I guess happens around any political concept that is, in some sense, perceived, in some sense, is coveted, in some sense, is criticized.
If I may respond, for me, I wonder if this also, if kind of responding to this point as well, like, depending on, again, the kind of targeted action, I don't necessarily see a tension for the anarchists. The state legalizes the squatting, right? They're able to accomplish their objective. And then move on to another objective that is intended to undermine the state, but the objective is to provide housing, then if the state of acquiesces, then that's not necessarily a problem.
Any last thoughts?
No.
Then, thank you very much.